Have you ever noticed how the most cold, quiet people in real life seem to pull attention the second they walk into a room? Not because they try, not because they entertain. They just stand there, contained, not begging for approval, and somehow everyone feels the gravity. And then you look at yourself and you do the opposite. You soften too early. You explain too much. You agree too fast. You hope your friendliness will earn you safety. You tell yourself it's just good manners. But deep down, you know the real motive is control. You want to control the outcome of how people feel about you, so you overfunction, overgive, overperform. Here's the painful truth. The kind of attraction most people want is not created by warmth. It's created by boundaries. When boundaries become a shield, not a costume, you stop leaking yourself into other people's chaos. And that changes how the world treats you. Today, we're going to talk about the dark psychology behind a little bit of honesty and a little bit of coldness, and why, for men especially, boundary based self respect is often the fastest route out of being treated like a resource and into being treated like a person. Not a project, not a therapist, not a piggy bank, a person. If you've been stuck in patterns where people take from you and then act surprised when you eventually break, this video is going to feel uncomfortably accurate. If you've been the good one who never causes trouble, but you're quietly exhausted from carrying other people's emotions, this video is going to say out loud what you've been swallowing. Because society loves to sell a fantasy, it tells you that being kind and agreeable is strength, but a lot of people confuse kindness with compliance. They confuse warmth with access, and they confuse their own fear of rejection with morality. So let's start with the simplest mechanism. The attraction to the cold isn't random, it's behavioral, it's psychological, it's a response to scarcity of control. People don't chase what they can predict, they don't fall for what feels easy to manage. Human desire, at its core, is driven by uncertainty and perceived agency. When someone has strong boundaries, you can't steer them, you can't smooth them over with flattery, you can't manipulate them with guilt, you can't purchase them with effort. In a world where most people are begging for approval, a person who holds steady becomes rare. Think about how you behave online. Someone posts an opinion. Most replies are not honest, they're strategized. People are terrified of being disliked, so they react like a customer service bot. They say what they think will keep them safe. They don't speak from the core, they speak from the fear. Now notice what happens when a person actually stays honest. When they don't rush to soothe you, when they don't apologize for having preferences, when they say no without drama, when they don't chase, when they don't over-explain, the comment section changes tone instantly. Suddenly, people treat that person as real, as unbuyable, as someone who might not be an easy mark. It's not that cold people are heartless, it's that they don't offer their nervous system to everyone as a public service. Warmth without boundaries invites extraction. It says, you can pull from me. It makes your time, your attention, your emotional labor available to anyone with a pulse and a problem. And because people learn behavior through reinforcement, other people will keep pulling. Not because they're evil, but because it works. Cold with integrity is different. It's not refusal to care. It's refusal to surrender your life. Imagine a man who enters a workplace meeting. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't perform. He doesn't laugh too loudly to show he belongs. When asked a question, he answers clearly and stops. When someone tries to recruit him into their late night drama, he says he can't and moves on. No emotional punishment, no anger, just a firm structure. People feel that, even if they don't have the language for it. Their brains register agency. They register that he is not available in the way they expected, and the mind responds with curiosity and respect. Now contrast that with the man who is nice. He tries to be liked. He says yes to everything. He jokes along with jokes he doesn't find funny. He listens to complaints he didn't ask for. He turns his own boundaries into a negotiable item. He becomes the emotionally convenient one. What happens to him? He becomes predictable. He becomes usable, and society rewards usefulness more than character.
That's why the good guy can become invisible while still being intensely present. You're there, you're available, you help, you show up, and still you're not taken seriously because you've trained others to believe your capacity is unlimited. This is where the video gets uncomfortable. The male coldness you admire in movies is often not a personality trait. It's a boundary system. It's a behavioral posture that says, I have a self. I decide what enters it. In real life, people don't fall in love with coldness. They fall in love with safety plus limits. Safety means your emotions are steady, not chaotic. Limits means your kindness isn't for sale. Those two together create trust. But many people can't tolerate limits because limits remind them of their own fear. They fear that if they become firm, people will leave. They fear abandonment. They fear that their identity depends on being needed. So they stay soft and they keep bleeding. Let's talk about that bleed because it's the hidden self's favorite addiction. The tragedy of the overly enthusiastic person isn't that they care too much, it's that they refuse to feel what it costs them. They don't want to admit that helping has become a coping strategy. They don't want to admit they're using being good as anesthesia for loneliness. So they overfunction, they absorb, they fix, they rescue, they become a human fire extinguisher for everyone else's emotional sparks. A micro story. Picture someone in their 20s who is always the one who listens. Every time a friend is upset, they're on call. They reply fast. They stay up late. They make themselves small so others can feel big. At first, it feels meaningful. They think love equals usefulness. They think loyalty equals self erasure. But slowly, they notice a pattern. The friend never asks how they are unless something collapses. The friend always returns when they need comfort and disappears when the person giving help expects reciprocity. The helper gets trapped in a loop. They tell themselves it's normal. They tell themselves the friend is stressed. They tell themselves at least I'm there. But underneath, something rots. Their self-worth starts to depend on being the solution. And then when they finally stop and say no, they get hit with guilt. That guilt is not proof they're wrong. It's proof they trained the relationship to run on their compliance. And then the good person pays the price. They become exhausted. They become bitter but still try to stay lovable. They become a martyr with a smile. They keep giving because stopping would mean confronting the fact that their identity was built on approval. Society calls that kindness, but psychological truth calls it fear disguised as virtue. Because the overly warm person doesn't actually want boundaries. They fear what boundaries would reveal, that they might lose connection, and that the connection might not be real. They fear being alone with their own feelings. So they keep the relationship alive by feeding it energy, not by nurturing it, by starving themselves to keep the structure standing. Here's the dark line. In many cases, being nice is a bid for control and a denial of resentment. And resentment is a signal. It's your mind saying, this is not safe for me anymore. The issue is that nice people treat resentment as a moral failure. They feel bad for feeling angry, so they swallow it and their nervous system learns to live in tension. Over time, you don't become kinder. You become quieter in public and harder to understand privately. You start longing for escape. You start fantasizing about running away. And then you wonder why you feel numb. That numbness is your body trying to protect you from constant emotional overexposure. Now compare that to the person who learned boundary-based coldness. Their coldness is not cruel. Their coldness is disciplined. They don't volunteer their energy like a public good. They don't step into every argument just because it exists. They don't join every gossip circle just because it's social oxygen. They don't become the judge of strangers while they ignore their own life. They listen, but they don't internalize everything. They care, but they don't absorb. And here's a key detail. Boundary-based people don't go cold naturally. They go cold after paying the price of being naive. At some point, they experienced enough manipulation, enough disappointment, enough betrayal to realize a brutal rule. The world will use your softness if you keep offering it. So they upgrade. They change how they relate. They stop trusting first and start verifying. They stop believing words and start watching patterns. They stop treating urgency as truth. This is why older adults often seem calmer. It isn't because they became emotionally superior overnight. It's because because their disappointments stopped being surprising. Their mind got trained. Their tolerance for nonsense increased, but their access to them decreased. That's the paradox people don't understand. The more self-aware you become, the less you perform. The less you perform, the more people notice you, because performance is a signal of insecurity, and insecurity is contagious, but not in the way people think. When you're insecure, you seek reassurance. When you seek reassurance, you become easy to control. People sense it, even if they can't articulate it. They start pushing buttons. They start testing your loyalty. They start using your empathy as a lever. But when you're secure, your empathy becomes selective, not selfish, selective. Your boundaries don't destroy love, they filter love. Imagine someone who says, I care, but I'm not available for chaos. In the short term, you might lose some people. The ones who only liked you when you were convenient will drift away. That's loss. But the real payoff happens later. The ones who stay are not confused about you. They can trust your consistency. They don't have to earn access with chaos. They don't have to earn you by suffering. They can just relate to a stable human. Now let's move deeper, because attraction is not the only topic here. There's a hidden self problem that goes beyond romance and into money, status, and identity. Most people don't stay soft because they're kind. They stay soft because they are financially and socially dependent. Dependence is an invisible leash. When you depend on others for approval, you fear losing them. When you depend on others for income, you fear disagreeing. When you depend on others for belonging, you fear being disliked. So you become adaptable in unhealthy ways. You compromise. You endure. You tolerate disrespect. You accept slow erosion of your boundaries because you believe you can't afford to stand up. This is why the nice person often becomes poor or drained even while working hard. Their energy leaks out through unspoken obligations. A micro story. A young professional moves into a new apartment. The neighbor asks for small favors, helping carry groceries, borrowing tools, covering a shift, lending money until next week. It starts tiny. It feels harmless. You think I'm just a good neighbor. Then it repeats. Always the same person asking, always the same excuse, always the same promise. One day, you need the money yourself. You need the tool yourself. You need the shift covered yourself. And the neighbor looks surprised, even offended, as if your life was never supposed to get in the way of their convenience. What went wrong? Boundaries, specifically the absence of boundaries. But there's another hidden issue. The nice person isn't just letting themselves be used, they are also training their own mind to believe they cannot say no. So they keep saying yes, and each yes creates a new internal rule. My comfort is negotiable. My dignity is negotiable. My money is negotiable. Then you end up sitting in the dark with disappointment, telling yourself, people have no respect. But the psychological truth is that you taught them respect is optional. This is why boundary work is not only emotional, it's practical, it's structural, it's the core of dignity. Now let's talk about a misconception that destroys many relationships. People hear advice like, be honest or be affectionate, and they turn it into a new kind of performance. They think honesty means oversharing everything immediately. They think affection means constant contact. They think romantic gestures mean swallowing your discomfort. No. Honesty is clarity without chaos. A little bit of honesty is saying the thing you've been avoiding because you fear how it will change the social temperature. A little bit of honesty is admitting your real preference, not your approved preference. A little bit of honesty is telling the truth about your capacity. I can't do that. I won't tolerate that. I'm not available for this kind of energy. And when you do that, something rare happens. You stop being a mirror. You become a boundary. People are drawn to boundaries because boundaries indicate a stable self. In a world full of people who bend, the person who holds steady becomes a reference point. That's also why the too good person attracts the wrong kind of people. If you are always eager, always accommodating, always available, you become a target, not necessarily for predators with mustaches, sometimes for normal people with weak self-control. But the result is the same. Your softness becomes their routine. The hidden self often refuses to acknowledge this pattern. It tells you that if you were more patient, more loving, more understanding, they would finally treat you right. But the universe doesn't punish people for having bad behavior. The universe rewards patterns, so you keep repeating the same behavior and expecting a different outcome. That is not hope. That is a loop. Now let's get into the most important loop, the one that keeps people stuck, emotional expectation. Many people suffer not because life is terrible, but because they assign meaning to other people that other people never agreed to carry. You expect them to read your mind. You expect them to protect you emotionally. You expect them to know what you need without you saying it. You expect them to respond in the way you would respond. And when they don't, you call it betrayal. When they do, you call it love. You're building your inner world on unstable external signals. This is psychological dependency. It's the addiction to confirmation. A powerful person can be ignored and still remain centered. A weak person can be complimented and still feel empty. Why? Because the weak person built their emotional foundation on other people's behavior. Independence is not a slogan. Independence is an internal muscle. It's the ability to decide your emotional response without needing permission from the person who triggers you. That's why boundary-based coldness feels like confidence. It's not because the person lacks feelings. It's because their feelings don't run the steering wheel. Let's say it bluntly. If you're emotionally dependent, you can't maintain boundaries. You will always crack under pressure because your nervous system interprets boundaries as danger. Danger to belonging, danger to attachment, danger to status, danger to love. So you compromise. You become smaller. You apologize for existing. You call it peace, but it's surrender. And surrender always has a cost. Over time, you start resenting. Then you either explode or collapse, often both. So, what does it mean to rise? Rise doesn't mean becoming a robot. Rise means becoming a person with a stable internal system. A stable system includes money boundaries, time boundaries, social boundaries, and emotional boundaries. Money first, because money reveals truth. If someone asks for money and you always give, you are not generous. You are anxious. If you're anxious, you're trying to buy relief from uncertainty. If you're buying relief, you will always pay more than you planned. A person with a strong boundary treats money like a tool, not like an offering. They don't lend casually. They don't rescue repeatedly. They don't pay for someone's irresponsibility and then act shocked when the irresponsibility continues. They also understand something that most good people refuse to accept. Interest, respect, and responsibility go together. When you repeatedly ignore risk, you are signing a contract with your own future suffering. That's why the too soft person ends up disappointed, not because they didn't give enough, because they didn't set terms. In relationships, the same law applies. If you tolerate disrespect, you are buying chaos later with interest. If you tolerate emotional manipulation, you are training manipulation to work. If you chase love, you become chaseable. A lot of people want love, but they're addicted to being needed. They want to feel chosen, not because they feel safe, but because they feel terrified. The hidden self-fear is this: if I'm not needed, I might be replaceable. If I'm replaceable, I might be worthless. And if I'm worthless, I have no protection. So they chase attention, they check phones, they read meanings into delays, they overreact to small changes, they interpret silence as abandonment. That's not love. That's survival behavior. Maturity changes the rules. A mature person can feel sadness without panicking. They can be alone without collapsing. They can tolerate delay without making it a prophecy. And when you develop that, people notice you're calm, not because you're cool, because you're not reactive. Reactivity is a vulnerability. It tells others you have a weakness they can exploit. When you stop reacting, people either respect you or they leave. Either outcome is cleansing. Let's talk about the social media traps, because 2026 people live inside them like fish in an aquarium. Everyone wants to be seen, but they're not actually living. They're performing. They argue, they react, they chase narratives, they try to win emotionally, and then they wonder why they feel spiritually exhausted. Your boundaries should extend to information. If you click bait yourself every day, you train your nervous system to stay aroused, irritated, and hungry for stimulation. That's why boundary-based people seem calmer. They don't feed their mind unlimited conflict. They don't join comment wars. They don't collect other people's negativity like trophies. They protect their attention because attention is life. Now we reach a key point. The video you're hearing is not telling you to become cruel. It's telling you to become lucid. It's telling you to stop using kindness as a disguise for fear. Because being kind is easy. The hard part is being honest about your limits. Hard truth. Many nice people are secretly angry, but they don't know how to express it cleanly.
They either swallow it and become bitter, or they explode and then act like a victim. Boundary-based people express limits before resentment accumulates. They don't pretend everything is fine. They don't keep tolerating violations until they finally break. They use the language of adulthood. They say no without punishment. They say stop without dramatizing. They say I'm not interested without insulting. This kind of honesty is unattractive to people who want access. That's fine. Attraction is not the goal. Compatibility is the goal. Now let's go even deeper, because the hidden self loves to lie about what it wants. People often claim they want respect, but they behave in ways that demand disrespect. How? By constantly negotiating their dignity. If you constantly justify yourself, you teach people you can be argued with. If you apologize for your needs, you teach people your needs are optional. If you chase affection, you teach people affection will be offered for free. A powerful man or woman does something else. They let the other person's effort reflect their seriousness. They don't accept crumbs and then call it romance. They also don't confuse coldness with lack of care. They're warm in the right places, and they're firm in the wrong places. This is the difference between a shield and a weapon. A shield protects you. It doesn't hurt anyone. A weapon attacks. It tries to win. People confuse these. They assume boundaries are aggression. But if your boundaries are calm, consistent, and not theatrical, then they are not aggression. They are self-respect. That's the adult form of love. Now, why does boundary-based honesty create attraction? Because most people are tired of emotional manipulation and performative warmth. Most people are exhausted from pretending. Most people want to be treated like an adult, but they don't know how to ask for it. So when they meet someone who is stable, they feel relief. Their nervous system relaxes. Their mind stops guessing. And when the mind stops guessing, desire increases. Because desire needs psychological room, a calm boundary creates psychological room. This also connects to the hidden self's fear of loneliness. Many people are terrified of being alone. They think loneliness is a failure. They think it means there's something wrong with them. But loneliness is not the same as abandonment. Loneliness is a condition. Abandonment is a story. A strong person can be lonely and still feel safe because their identity does not depend on constant contact. Weak people treat every silence as danger. That's why they end up in toxic relationships. They prefer intensity over stability. They prefer unstable connection over healthy distance. A micro story. Someone stays in a relationship where the other person disappears for days, then returns with apologies, then repeats the cycle. The person stays because the return feels like salvation. When the other is gone, the person is not